what's up? Hello, my name is Emma and today I'm going to be giving you guys my April wrap up. Now in the month of April, I read 5 books, which I'm totally satisfied with, especially because I had so many papers to work on this month and I got them all done and I was still able to read some really great books. The first book I read in the month of April is actually one that I read for a paper, but it is definitely worth putting on this list, and that is Manson, The Life and Times of Charles Manson by Jeff Gwynne. This is a biography on Charles Manson, who, if you didn't know, is a convicted murderer. There are 1,000,010 great documentaries out there if you're interested in hearing the story of Charles Manson and the Manson family, but he essentially grew to have a cult of his own that ended up killing, I believe it was like 7 people. He is a very sick man, and I have been fascinated by him and his story since I was like 13 years old, and as a criminal justice minor during one of my classes, I had the opportunity to write a paper on a convicted criminal, so I of course went with Charles Manson. I gave Manson 4 out of 5 stars. It was definitely very enjoyable, especially coming from somebody who does not read nonfiction, especially not biographies whatsoever. If you are either very intrigued by Charles Manson, or if you need to find out more information about him, whether it is for personal interest or for paper like me, I would highly recommend this book because it goes right from his very birth all the way to when the book was published in like 2014, where Manson is now. It is super informative, extremely detailed. I learned so much more about this man's story than I did in all the years I spent looking online and watching documentaries. It was a really valuable read. If you like biographies and true crime novels, I would definitely recommend checking out Manson, and even though I read it for school, I definitely enjoyed my time reading it, and I'm excited to read more books on Charles Manson in the future. You'd think with how long I've been doing booktube, I'd actually be prepared for all of the videos I film, but I keep needing to add things in every once in a while. So apparently I did not mark my date of reading my next book on Goodreads, so it didn't come up when I checked to make sure all the books that I read in the month of April, but I did read a 6th book, and that was 13 Reasons Why by Jay Asher. I listened to this book on audiobook, which I would highly recommend because there are 2 narrators for Clay and Hannah, and it made for such a great reading experience. I actually listened to this full audiobook in one day, which is absolutely crazy for me, and it was also my busiest day of the week, but I couldn't stop listening, guys. I just absolutely flew through this novel. I personally gave 13 Reasons Why 5 out of 5 stars. I had the best time reading it. I'm so happy I actually finally experienced the story after so many people have loved it for so many years. I was really interested in watching the Netflix series, but of course I wanted to read the book first, so I just marathoned the audiobook. I loved it and watched the series, so if you would like to check out my series review for 13 Reasons Why, that will be linked in the description. I personally think 13 Reasons Why is a very important book. It brings light to a lot of issues like bullying and suicide and sexual assault. It does not shy away from these sensitive topics, which I really personally appreciate. 13 Reasons Why is also not exempt from problems whatsoever. I do think there is a certain narrative in that story that might border on romanticizing suicide with the way that Clay views Hannah and the kind of message that comes about with their relationship. There is also the fact that it does deal with a character who commits suicide, and the discussion of mental illness is kind of completely ignored in this story, and I think that being able to bring awareness to depression in addition to suicide would have made it so much stronger. It's definitely not the most perfect novel out there, but I do think it has an important message. I really valued my time reading it, but I do understand all of the critiques of it as well, but I thought it was a really enjoyable read. It's definitely one of my new favorites, and I'm super happy I read it this month. The next book I read in the month of April was Everything by Nicola Yoon. After years of wanting to read Everything, I finally picked it up because the movie is coming out. I was feeling super motivated. I ended up giving Everything 3.5 out of 5 stars. This is definitely a book where I hyped it up in my head for years. Since like BEA 2015, when everyone got ARCs, I really wanted to read this book. I had spent essentially 2 years hyping this book up in my head and listening to all of these amazing reviews that I think I set my expectations a little too high and they didn't really follow through. It was a really fun story. It definitely was a great YA contemporary for something that was just out of enjoyment, but it definitely was not the best book I've ever read. I feel like it was a little too romanticized. I understand it is a romance novel, but I felt that Maddie took way too many risks in the name of love that were just irresponsible and promote somewhat of a harmful message. And the other reason I didn't like this book is because it does border on the more negative side of disability rep in literature, as we have a main character that has been diagnosed with severe combined immunodeficiency. I am not going to spoil anything, but if you are interested in finding out as to what the disabled community has to say about this book, I will leave a review from Disability and Kidlit, which is a really great resource course on disability in literature. I really appreciated their review, so I'd recommend checking that out. But it's not very positive when it comes to disability rep, which is something that I had a problem with. But it was an enjoyable story, and I do love the characters of Maddie and Ollie. I did get to see Everything early, and I have a really exciting video coming very soon. But I did really enjoy the story of Everything, even though I did have some problems with it and it didn't really live up to the hype, but I am glad I read it, and it was definitely a great reading experience. The next book I read in the month of April is Things I Should Have Known by Claire Lizabnik. This is a book that I read as a part of HMH Teen's Summer of Love campaign, so you guys will be getting a spoiler-free review of this book very soon in the coming months. Things I Should Have Known follows a girl named Chloe who has a sister on the autism spectrum. Chloe is a very outgoing individual, which kind of is in contrast to his sister Ivy, who tends to stay at home most of the time. She wants her to be more engaged with people in her life, so she sets out to find her sister Love. Chloe ends up finding a boy named Ethan who is also in Ivy's class that she thinks could be a good match, so they start hanging out, and she finds out that Ethan's brother is a boy in Chloe's class who she does not get along with. I personally really enjoyed Things I Should Have Known. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars, and it definitely exceeded the original expectations I had for it. I was definitely a little nervous going into this book because I have never really read about a character with autism, and I'm going to be reviewing it, so I did some research beforehand, and I feel a little bit more confident in my reviewing capabilities, but I really enjoyed it. It's definitely a story that I absolutely flew through. Like, the second I started, I read like 50 pages in one sitting, and it felt like it was 10 minutes. It is definitely a story about personal growth that comes from within. Chloe grows in her own way, Ivy grows in her own way, Ethan grows in his own way, and Ethan's brother David does grow in his own way as well. Very inspirational in the most positive way. It's a lot about self-awareness and kind of confirming your values in life, and I had a really great time reading it. I cannot wait to share more of my thoughts with you guys in the review in the upcoming months, but thank you HMH Teen so much for sending me this book to review, and I can't wait to review it. The next book I read in the month of April is an audiobook, and that is This Is Where It Ends by Mariki Nijkamp. This is a YA contemporary that follows the events of a school shooting that takes place over, I believe it's like 54 minutes. This is another book that has been hyped up for me for so long, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. This book is really hard for me to review, and I will leave it linked below, as well as my Everything review and the review for the following book I'm going to talk about, because I feel like sometimes I just express myself better on Goodreads than I can in a wrap-up talking about so many books. This is a hard book for me to review because it was so good, but it was not the book for me. I'm a very plot-based reader. I love things that are super high intensity. There's a lot of action, there's a lot of events, and surprisingly, this book was not like that at all, although that's what I kind of expected going into it. It's extremely like 99.9% character-based and 0.1% plot. The story is divided amongst like 4 different perspectives, and like the majority of this book is told in flashbacks, which is not something that I personally like to read about. I like everything in the present, so there was a lot about this book that was not in line with my personal reading taste, but I did come out really enjoying the story. There was some great diversity in this book, which I really appreciated. For example, we have a relationship between 2 girls at the forefront of the story. One of those girls is Hispanic, and we have another narrator who is also Hispanic because they're brothers and sisters. So ultimately, I definitely enjoyed this read. I thought it was worthwhile, and I would recommend it. It just wasn't in my personal reading taste. Like, I would give it a 5 out of 5 stars for just the content of the book itself, regardless of how I enjoyed it, but a 3 for my enjoyment, which is why I settled in the middle for 4 stars. So we feel like character-based books, I would definitely recommend This Is Where It Ends, but I am really happy that I finally chose to read it, and I would also recommend the audiobook format because I thought it also added to the experience, having so many different narrators. It was a really good read, it just wasn't necessarily for me, which I think is really interesting because I don't normally have that reading experience. And so my final book on my April book haul is another one that I'm going to leave my Goodreads review below because I feel like that one just really does explain my thoughts so much better, but I read Does My Head Look Big in This by Rhonda Abdel Fattah. I read this as a part of Diversity Bingo, which is a reading challenge I am partaking in that kind of motivates me to read more diverse books this year, and one of those squares was for a hijabi main character written by a hijabi author. So this book is essentially about a 17-year-old girl who makes a decision to wear her hijab full-time out into the world, at school, everywhere she goes, which is a really big deal for a lot of Muslim women. And so this book follows the course of events after our main character Amal has decided to wear the hijab full-time, the kind of stigma and discrimination and prejudice that she encounters, as well as the positives regarding her faith and her relationships. I ended up giving Does My Head Look Big in This 3 out of 5 stars. It was definitely an enjoyable read, but I did have some issues with it. For the positives, I really enjoyed my first experience reading about a Muslim main character. The absolute best parts of this book are when Amal is talking about her faith and her relationship with God and the experiences she has as a Muslim Muslim women grown up in an Arab household. We never really get books about teens expressing their faith regardless of the religion they are affiliated with, so I really loved being able to have this little bit of insight into what it is like to be a Muslim teen. Literally every single time the topic of Islam came up, I was super satisfied and I was smiling the whole time. It was a really great reading experience. Unfortunately, the writing of this book was definitely not the best. It felt very simplistic and basic. It kind of left the characters feeling 14 as opposed to 17. I go more in depth with my negatives in that Goodreads review, but the other issue I had with it was the portrayal of body image. One of Amal's best friends is overweight and she has a very negative body image, and I thought the execution of this plotline was just really poor. The way weight loss and body image is portrayed in this book I felt was very harmful and insensitive. There's a ton of skinny shaming, which is supposed to be kind of a buffer to fat shaming, which is not how that works. Throughout the course of the story, the character partakes in quite a few unhealthy eating habits to compensate for their weight, and it is never challenged. It is never said that like these are unhealthy and not okay, which I had a big problem with. And in the end, nothing is resolved and the character still has body image issues that are very negative. So I had a big issue with that. The writing definitely isn't a core part of the story, but it is something that I noticed that did dampen my enjoyment a little bit. But I went into this book to read about a Muslim main character, and I got a great book about this Muslim main character. So it was definitely a worthwhile and valuable read to me. So despite my issues, I did enjoy this book, and if you're somebody who is looking to read a book about a Muslim main character and you can kind of disregard those issues, it is something that I would recommend, and I'm happy I read it. So that is it for my April wrap up. Of course, let me know in the comments below if you have read any of the books that I talked about this month, or if you are interested in any. And of course, let me know what your favorite read of April was. But that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you soon for a new one. Bye!